Hi everyone, welcome. We have Harry back with us again. It wasn't that long since you were on here, I think, but Harry has a new fascination that he has been researching quite a lot about, and that is the microbiome, which I think is very, very interesting. And I still think there's probably a lot of holes in the research that we need to fill in, but we're going to talk a little bit about the gut microbiome in general, how that relates to the gut-brain interaction with addictions and appetite, etc. So I'm literally going to do what I did last time. I'm going to let Harry step up on his box and take over the show and just actually educate you, because what he has to say is always very interesting and very well researched. So thank you very much for coming on, Harry, and the floor is
You're
yours.
welcome. You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me on and to discuss addictions and stuff like that.
Oh,
Recently, some of my subscribers have probably seen I've had a bit of fascination of different bacterial strains for probiotics and stuff like that. I sort of have gone down the rabbit hole of looking at things like immunomodulation, sort of the hormonal system, which has to do with appetite, has to do with all these sort of areas, plus some other areas like, pathogenics like C. diff and a whole lot of other things, and how they are affected by the type of gut microbiome that we have. So how we've changed through lifestyle changes, and also industries introduce things, and modern medicine have introduced things into our lifestyle or into the way we manage health in general, and how these have driven certain problems or imbalances in the gut microbiome. The gut microbiome in general, just for people to understand, the research in it is very new. It's about, there is some older research, but it's very, very, superficial. It's just sort of general. The focus was more on how does this actually affect certain animals, or how does it actually affect certain foods, or whether this basically will ferment a specific food. It was more for the food industry, their focus. That's where it was more the focus. But since then, we've seen in the last couple of decades, we've seen an explosion in gut problems throughout initially through a lot of the Western world, but now it's actually moving into other parts of the world. And it's sort of followed with the new type of, or foods of, they call it foods of civilization, or the modern processed food, and they tend to change. But there are factors beyond the food as well, which is antibiotics as well, misuse and overuse, but also that a lot of people in the medical profession don't realize that there are some bacterial strains that are very vulnerable to antibiotics and can be decimated in the body. And when you misuse them, I can understand when somebody has, a specific situation like septicemia, severe sort of cases, or they have severe throat infections or other things like that, where you may need something like that. Severe, where things are out of balance, and really you've got an overgrowth which could be potentially fatal or threatening.
Can I just ask you something there? Yeah. I can't remember what the percentage is, but the percentage of antibiotics used for medical treatment of humans is not over 50%. The majority is going to livestock, etc., isn't it?
That's true as well. Yes.
So aren't we killing off maybe the bacteria that would be beneficial to us?
That is true
before
as well.
They even get to us.
Exactly. Some of a lot of these bacteria, especially the certain strains of the Lactobacillus family, and certain strains of a number of the other beneficial, which is acid-loving bacteria, which tend to basically be found in animal foods, in particular meats and stuff like that. You'll find them in cured meats and stuff like that. So another reason why I consume a lot of cured meats. I know people are poo-poo cured meats in terms of histamines, but they're wrong. Histamines are actually, it's the homeostasis of histamines which is the problem, not histamines themselves. I will do something in future for my subs on histamines, but that's for the future, not for this. But they actually, I'll give you just one point to just point this out.
Sure.
Histamines actually are involved in myelination of nerve cells. That should tell you everything. If you were to kill off histamines or lower them really substantially down, you would have problems with your nervous system.
So if
That is
someone
why you
takes
don't
a
want.
lot of antihistamines, would you put yourself at risk of developing some nerve problems?
Exactly. There you're actually dealing with the symptoms, not with a problem.
Because I've been
Again,
taking antihistamines every day for the last
it's not a good thing.
20 plus years,
No, not a good
25.
thing. Believe me, it's not a good thing.
But a rash isn't good either.
Yeah, and that's you know, people don't realise that the importance of histamine in terms of the nervous system. But overexpression, yes, can be a problem for people, especially when they've got a leaky gut and stuff like that. But the thing is, what preceded? Was it the histamines or the leaky gut? You know, so you've got to fix the, you know, the leaky gut rather than basically with good nutrition and all that, species appropriate foods and stuff like that, and some supplementation with certain bacterial strains to basically fix all that. And then once you've done that, like that strain of Lactobacillus reuteri that I actually talk about, the DSM 17938, I think it is, from memory that is. Now,
that's nerdy.
Yeah, that strain actually also helps with tight junctions in the gut.
Right.
So that should give you an idea that there are certain bacterial strains, and that strain is very susceptible to antibiotics and antibiotic mimicking substances like glyphosate, which is endemic through the food supply, and a lot of meats, which are basically fed a lot of grains and stuff like that. I mean, yes, the animal can detox slightly through the liver, you know, but it doesn't eliminate all of it. There will be some residual stuff. And plus, a lot of these animals are fed grain, so they're pumped full of antibiotics. So some of that stuff will get through, and that will cause problems. So it's not the meat that's the problem, it's the stuff that they're pumping into the animals. Traditionally,
Sorry, it's so interesting that you mentioned just that particular one, because I think this was 5 years ago. So you know that Bart has fibromyalgia and his aunt does as well. And she recommended those probiotics to him because they had helped her. So now I'm kind of like, the coin is actually falling down. I'm kind of getting why that might have been. So that's super cool.
Yeah, and that's the thing. A lot of people don't realise that these are so important in immunomodulation, in fixing gut permeability, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Our gut microbiome actually signals. There are certain strains that actually are just basically, there are pathogenics, there are neutrals that just basically maybe produce some, you know, CLA or short chain fatty acids, or, you know, certain other substances. I mean, those two strains that I talked about, that I've done some videos, also actually produce vitamin B9 and B12. So they also produce and support one of the methylation pathways. So they're beneficial in multiple ways. The problem is nowadays that people are consuming species inappropriate foods to much larger extent, and a lot of these foods are also high, you know, tend to basically promote the pathogenics. And then on the other hand, they're hitting their body with a lot of glyphosate, which is a patented antibiotic. So this is Monsanto's. They patented glyphosate as an antibiotic. So it's not Harry Sapano saying that, it's the company itself that is patented with the patent office. So that's quite clear. And these are endemic through all the GMO foods, all the actual modern foods, because you can spray them. I mean, today's most basically farming land is sterile. You basically spray everything dead, and it's just, you know, you're
crazy.
Pretty much, yeah. It's bloody madness what they're doing to the sort of to the food supply and to the ecology. Yeah. And this is the thing that we have a fight with the actual vegans, and they say, well, you know, we need to use. I mean, you even hear Richard Burgess saying, you know, I mean, we don't need animals. We just need the petrochemical, basically fertilizers, and the, you know, and this sort of stuff to kill off the weeds, and we can feed everybody. That's their logic. It's just madness. Yeah, let's just wreck people's guts even further.
Yeah.
You know, so that's the sort of, they just want to take it to the next level on steroids, or as I call it, vegan junk food 2.0. You
Yep.
know, I think we need to use this sort of approach because it's valid in science. So
Yep.
we're not talking bullshit, but at the same time, we point quite clearly that this plant-based agenda, which these proponents are pushing, and then the food industry itself can see big profit margins in. So there is a sort of a, you could say, a friendly relationship there. And you can see even the vegans promoting some of these food companies. I mean, the fake meats have gone through the roof in the vegan community. The vegan community, once upon a time, used to be a community promoting, more wholesome, or what they call wholesome, but,
Yep.
real food,
Yep.
so to speak. The problem is they realized, well, it's deficient. It's nutrient deficient. You waste away. You just have to see the ones that do raw this or that or whatever.
Yeah.
And so now they've moved over to this new type of junk food, veganism, and it works for them because they can sustain people on that because there's a lot of like vitamins and minerals that are put into this sort of stuff. Now, they're not the healthiest ones that they put in there or that, but, and we'll probably, with a lot of the seed oils and a lot of the other things, end up causing these people cardiovascular disease, like everybody on the SAD diet, because it's a vegan SAD diet, but it's slightly more sustainable.
Yeah.
You don't waste away. You basically are no different than the SAD diet who is engaging the Randall cycle and fattening up. And you can see them, the vegans are going from very skinny vegans to more fatter vegans nowadays, on that. So yeah, everybody's adopting the new version because it's easier to get most of the people to transition from a SAD diet to another SAD diet.
I can see that. Yep.
Yeah, and that's sort of what's happening, unfortunately. Let me just share something on the screen.
Sure. You should have access to that.
Yep. Okay.
Wait.
So basically, this is a Scientific America sort of, just a general review. I've got some other studies, but this is a general review. Just to basically, I don't want to complicate things too much for people. I will be doing specific strains and specific pathways on my channel eventually. That people can expect that in December. There'll be a sort of a whole lot of, the specific strains and all that. Here I'm just talking in general. So they're actually looking at, I'll just go down because a lot of it's all dribble and all that. They look at these ones like Lactobacillus Plantarum, these other ones here, breve, acidophilus, so a number of these ones actually have benefits and some of them don't. So these ones here in particular, some of them actually, the flies lost all interest in protein, so they had more interest in sugar. So that was interesting.
Is that me?
Look, you would have to do a gut microbiome test to find out what your gut microbiome sort of, it's not so much what are populating and to what percentages.
Yeah.
I think there's a number of companies that do it. People have to do their own research on that because I haven't looked into companies and the pricing issues because different countries have different companies and all that. I know there's not really much capacity in Tasmania, so you have to go interstate like Sydney or Melbourne. Mm-hmm. There are companies for Australian people. I have no idea in New Zealand and have no idea in North America which companies, would provide these sort of services or not in that regard. So I can't recommend anything to people directly at this stage. But what I can actually point out is the sort of stuff they need to look out for, and then they could basically sort of You were going to say, asking?
Yeah, I was just one of the things that we keep hearing that I think might be totally irrelevant, but the importance of having a huge diversity of bacteria. What do you think about that?
Let me put it this way. It depends what they mean by diversity. One's diversity is not another person's diversity. My view is if you're eating a species-appropriate diet, you will tend to basically promote the sort of bacterial strains that prefer protein over sugar, which basically means naturally you will basically generate more short-chain fatty acid from protein rather than sugar. And also some of the strains will actually also promote conjugated linoleic acid. So the sort of the PUFA type, the trans, because it's not a cis, it's a trans type fat, animal fat, but which has beneficial things in terms of weight loss and stuff like that been shown.
Yep.
So if you've got basically the gut microbiome having more of the strains that actually tend to increase those type of molecules, then you're going to basically get some benefit in that regard. So, which is really important. Let's just go to this PubMed one. They are actually looking at, this is the microbiome ecology, human gut microbes associated with obesity. Now, these are the ones that are actually associated. One of the two, bacteroidetes.
Bacteroidetes, I think.
DTs, that's it. It's always a tongue twister,
Yep.
you know me. And the firmicutes, which are the two dominant types that you get in the gut microbiome. They're the dominant types you get. The other strains are sort of minor players. Now you can actually, traditionally they were slightly higher. A lot of the reuteri and some of the others were much higher in the food supply. But nowadays they are much more vulnerable to antibiotics. So they tend to be quite decimated, and they play a very important role in immunomodulation and fighting off pathogenic bacteria, where these ones are not as good at doing that, either one of them. Now, firmicutes, they actually increase when you eat more fiber, more plant-based type foods. They actually increase appetite. They actually encourage the increase of, people's need for more, sugary type calories. So if they increase in the body, they're a problem. So when you're eating a species appropriate diet, you usually end up growing more of these, the bacteroidetes. I fucking hate trying to these scientific terms. Anyway, let's just call it the B ones.
The B ones and the F ones.
And the F ones, the fuck you ones.
Yeah, it's a good one. B for, I don't even know.
Benefit, and the
F
other
for fuck
word. But the difference is these ones will proliferate depending on what you're eating. So if you eat more protein, you'll increase the one. If you eat more fiber and more starchy type foods, you'll proliferate the other ones. And the other ones have been shown quite clearly to encourage more, weight gain or more, less satiety in a sense. So they tend to be found more in obese people, where the others, the B ones, are found more in lean people and normal weight people. So that should tell you something, that there is, that the foods, and also these firmicutes actually increase a lot of production of short chain fatty acid. And this is why a lot of the plant-based people say, oh, they produce so much, get the fiber, they produce so much short chain fatty acid and all that, and they provide so much fuel for the actual gut. No, the problem is the type of composition. You get more acetone, and that actually, if you get too much, will be converted in the liver back to glucose.
Yay. That's
the problem with those short chain fatty acids. So there is only so much capacity for the gut. A bit of fiber, like, let's say you're having a bit of fiber or a bit of some herbs and spices you put on your food to give it a bit of color, to give it a bit of taste and flavor. That small amount isn't going to cause the problems, because it'll generate enough for the gut epithelial cells to basically get some fuel, and you won't create excess amounts that requires then to be dealt with by the liver. So that's
would this have the same effect as fructose on the liver if you have too much of them? Or adding on top of that? Or
look, it's like too much glucose. Eventually the body actually has an overload and starts having a bit of a, especially when you become diabetic, it tends to create a spillage out, and you tend to basically urinate glucose. But before that happens, actually, you start converting more and more of that into fructose so you can store it as fat. So this same stuff, if you're adding too much fiber and, your body has to deal with it somehow. So it'll turn to glucose. Now, it depends on what other things you're eating at the same time, if you're eating too much of the other things. And people that are going to have more of these bacteria in their gut microbiome will tend to basically eat more carbohydrate-rich foods as well, not only, grains and all sorts of things. So they will tend to basically have this overload in sugar production, and potentially so, because there's a lot of push in the plant-based world where they say, one way of mitigating too much glucose, eat more fiber. But the more fiber actually promotes these bacteria that actually increase your appetite. The requirement. So they make you more ravenous. And that's why people, fiber is contraindicated. It doesn't really help. It just does not help. It basically, can exacerbate the problems. We know from research that it exacerbates things like constipation and all sorts of issues, but it also, while it may prevent you from getting these big glycemic shocks, it still feeds the beast, so to speak, through the gut microbiome.
And would they, because we're being told here that I'm not really sure what the truth is, so maybe this is a little bit unrelated, but maybe not, that gluconeogenesis is demand driven. So would that kind of push that even though there is no demand?
Look, it's hard to say because it's not really, we know from studies that have been done on ketogenic or low carb type diets, we see it as a quite clear demand, but that doesn't mean that somebody that's eating a lot of carbohydrates, a lot of other things, that whole process cannot be deranged, so to speak. The problem is trying to experiment on humans and putting probes in them to see exactly what happens. We haven't done that. Right. So we can speculate, but we can't, definitively say this is happening or this will happen or whatever.
Yeah, I recently read a review paper. I haven't actually gone back and had a look at the studies that were cited, but they were saying that when you have insulin resistance in the liver, you don't get the inhibition on gluconeogenesis that you normally would from insulin. So you will create a lot of carbs just for the sake of doing it because the liver doesn't get the signal that there is enough.
That's right. There is some experimental stuff on rodents and rats and stuff like that. That's true. That actually shows that. And being a mammal, that probably happens in humans as well. But we don't have, I can't, say that I've got research that I can show in humans.
Yeah. But
the likelihood that this sort of derangement that does take place is, strong. Where it ceases to be demand, and you've got, because of the resistance, the body is sort of, thinking, oh, we need more glucose. So, it can actually derange the whole system. That's a derangement that basically is out of, it's like leptin resistance, even though there's so much leptin out there, your body's not getting the signaling properly. Yeah. And so it basically, but that's a derangement process because of, modern eating practices, lifestyle and all that have created these derangements in a number of people. And it's growing in numbers, unfortunately, because of the foods that they eat and the lifestyle that they have and many other factors. But it's really important that people understand that that these sort of strains, do have, these are the dominant ones. So I did want to touch on these and sort of to explain to people that, plant-based foods will increase the one and meat-based foods, proteins will increase the other. And we saw that in the Scientific America article where they talked about it in animals. the differences between the two. But here we're actually looking at, some work that's been done on 2 groups or, in human guts and stuff like that. So we've confirmed from one study to the other in that regard. Oh, don't do that. The menu's coming down. I better click here so I can go retract. Let me just get rid of these because otherwise I can't get to it.
Fair enough.
So association between body mass index and firmicutes and bacteroidetes ratio in adult Ukrainian population. So they basically also saw the same thing. I'm not going to go through the study because, but just to basically explain, I'll just quickly. You can actually, not that one. That's on the actual ratios, as you can see, where firmicutes is going up, where the other one's going down. So the sort of differences in that regard. So which is really good in body mass index.
Yep.
So the trend line and all that. And where was the other one? Or was it in the other study? Can't remember now. Yeah, too many things. Anyway, I'll get rid of that. And this is another study, which is basically in terms of age. There seems to be a change, but I sort of find them funny, these sort of studies. They go, oh, is it the age, or is it really that basically when you assault your gut microbiome over a number of decades with inappropriate stuff, you obviously will get these changes where you don't see them in tribal societies. So,
and the likelihood that you had more antibiotics,
precisely,
etc. Yeah.
And that's why I don't like the actual title, because it really is not being honest in that regard. And they just look at the changes. So you've got more.
How old are these people?
Differences. They're looking at different sort of generation changes to these ratios. And then let me just, where was the other one? No, it wasn't in study. Can't remember now where the other study is. Anyway, so we can see the sort of changes between different ages in that regard. So, these ones tend to dominate into older age, but it's just the way it is, but they don't really go into the sort of details. So
how resistant to the antibiotics that we are usually using are the firmicutes? Do they survive that very well, or do they also take a big hit? What's the deal there?
They do survive much better in that regard, because especially the people that are eating those foods, they tend to basically, support them to come back very quickly with carbohydrates. They tend to basically proliferate much, especially when the other bacteria are being decimated, because of then they proliferate. And I think,
of course,
there's epidemiological, there's no randomized control. There's epidemiological associational studies showing that when some of that in obese people, these bacteria dominate the firmicutes. So it's quite clear that the other ones have been out competed.
Yeah.
But it's always, again, like the chicken and egg, which came first.
Mm-hmm.
There's an association there, but we can't prove causation. We've got to be very careful what we say. We can't prove causation, but obviously having more of one rather than the other strain means that you're going to have more issues in that regard.
Yeah.
But still, we can't, and it would be disingenuous for me to basically say we can. We can't. It's just basically like that. Now there is another lactobacillus. It's called, I'm trying to remember it, that's cellule. I'm thinking the Greek word. Salivarius or salivarius, or anyway. And this one, what it does is it actually, this lactobacillus tends to change. I can't even remember. It's actually got a special code, but I can't remember it. It changes the ratios in favour of the bacteria, the bee ones.
Beneficial ones.
Yeah, it favours them. So it actually, in that regard. And so that's one thing that that really helps.
Yeah.
There's another one, which is the Rhamnosus. And Rhamnosus, trying to think now, that was in obese men and women. There's a study. I will show that on a video that I'm going to do on mine in the December period. Yeah. The specific strain, because I want to promote these strains and all that. And it's a specific strain, and that actual one has been shown to basically really help with weight loss and maintenance, you know, for obese people, and you know, in that regard. So it sort of helps in that regard. This same strain also improves liver health, and also is the one that regulates leptin. So if somebody's, let's say, has got leptin, if somebody's got, you know, pre-diabetes or diabetes, they normally will not only have insulin resistance, they'll also have leptin resistance.
Yeah.
So leptin resistance sort of helps. Sorry, it re-regulates or makes leptin be seen by the brain, so it can actually then down-regulate the hunger. So it can actually improve satiety or the suppress appetite, so to speak. So this strain also is another one of those lactobacillus types that gets decimated by antibiotics. So that's the other thing that is the problem with that. Let me just remember the other one. What's the other one? Where's my probiotics info? Okay, so yep. Okay, so because I can't remember the damn things. So the ones that make you fat, let's just cover those for a sec. There is the Lactobacillus acidophilus. Now, because I just can't remember them off the top of my head. I remember acidophilus, I mentioned it to you earlier, but the other ones I can't bloody remember. And the acidophilus is put in all the probiotics out there, and it's put in a lot of the commercial yogurts and stuff like that have got acidophilus. Well, acidophilus basically increases your appetite. That's why the industry put it out there in those. You won't find it in raw dairy, and you won't find it in basically, you know, cured stuff and, you know, that are done traditionally. But you will find it in these commercial things. And that's especially the ones that they put sugar in and sugar substitutes and so-called fruit, healthy fruit yogurts, you know, all that shit, tend to have acidophilus and some of the other strains. Why? Because they know it promotes appetite. Crazy. It makes you want to eat more. So it's not the yogurt that's bad. So if you have a traditionally made yogurt without acidophilus, you're not going to be running to the tub continuously. But with acidophilus in there, you'll go through the whole friggin' tub of yogurt. So yeah, the food industry are smart. They've researched this stuff. They know how it works, and they put it in there deliberately to increase your appetite, so you eat more. You
sneaky bloody money. Bastards.
Exactly, basically.
This is going to be demonetized. We're swearing today.
I know. You know, understandable. You know. The other one is fermentum, and these are all lactobacillus types. Yep. Ingluviei, what a name. And there is also some strains, not of reuteri, not the ones that I actually showed, but another one. And it's sort of, in some people, some of the reuteri strains, because there's a whole, if you go and look at reuteri supplementation, you'll find all these cheap forms. Yeah. They usually start with M's and N's and L's and stuff like that. And those tend to be basically, when you see those supplements, don't buy them, because they tend to be these sort that tend to be more prominent in obese people. So do not buy those strains. That's why I talk about specific strains and not broad spectrum. That's why I'm against broad spectrum. Now you understand. Yeah. So I want the species appropriate food to encourage the growth of the beneficial ones, the good ones that will increase satiety and all that. But I want basically to eliminate the other ones, to outcompete them, and then to give specific strains that help for immunity, fighting off pathogens and all the other sort of stuff. So these ones will dominate even more in your gut. And as they dominate more, you'll get more better, sort of satiety, insulin, leptin resistant, all these sort of things start being better improved in general and all that. So
this other one, the fermentum, whatever it was called, that one is also more
FERMENTUM and FERMENTUM. So that one
is also more prevalent in obese people.
Yes. Okay. Cool. And so, but the big one, the big sort of, you could say the big gorilla in the actual food supply is acidophilus.
Yeah, so it's everywhere.
Yeah, it's everywhere, exactly. Yeah. It's there for a reason, to fatten you up, to make you want to eat more of their foods. Yeah. They tell you, oh, it's so healthy for you, for your gut. No, it's so healthy for our profit margins. Yeah. That's what it's healthy for. And so there's a number of others. I mean, I've talked about a couple, and I will. The Bifidobacteriums, there are certain strains there that are really, important. There's another one, Lactobacillus, which is called gasseri, but the specific strains, you have to know the strains. You'll have to wait for that for my specific videos. And that's also has a sort of these ones actually are really nice. It reduces skin fat.
Okay.
Really important that, because some people sometimes
the gasseri.
Okay. So, but at specific strains, they're not all of them that do the same thing. Some can do the opposite. So you have to know the specific strains. People have to wait for that information. And there's, the other one, there's Lactobacillus Paracasi. The majority of those actually are quite beneficial in terms of reducing appetite. So they are very appetite suppressant. If you were to put them in the food supply, nobody would buy any sort of stuff. They'd eat a bit and they'd go, oh, I don't feel like eating anymore. Yeah. So that's the sort of stuff you want to really get into your system in that regard. Or if you're making a kefir, putting some stuff like that for your obese mother.
Yeah.
Sneak it in. She won't know. No. So you don't have to tell her. Then there is another one, Plantarum. And that one actually has the ability to increase, but certain strains, CLA, conjugated linoleic acid, which helps with fat burning and stuff like that. So there's a number of them that I've come across that basically have a lot of benefits in terms of modulation, in terms of fat loss, but also in terms of basically helping to improve this sort of gut microbiome in a way where it's, you could say, more orientated to basically not making you hungry. That makes sense from an ancestral point of view. You want people to basically not be excessively hungry all the time, because they just don't have access to stuff. They'd go mad. They'd be killing each other. I mean, just think of it. We don't. When we use the terms of people having certain behavior issues, ADHD or whatever, or people having hangry or hungry or hangry or whatever they call it, whatever. These sort of there is a gut microbiome dimension to that.
Yep,
so it's
sure.
What the food industry is putting in there, what you're killing off, which is beneficial, and then what you're doing is then from the food industry, so you're killing off some of the good, important ones, and then you're feeding your body some of the stuff that basically is going to increase your appetite. So you've got the pathogenics in there doing damage that are not being controlled because the other ones have been lost, and then you're getting the types that basically are going to increase your appetite and make you more hungry, more ravenous and stuff like that. I think this is another element why people, when they do an elimination diet and go back just to steak, They don't eat any yogurts or any of these other animal foods, and they just go to steak. They really fix up the gut microbiome, because the good, Rhamnosus, reuteri, the good strains, the ones that, and all these other beneficial ones that actually produce Plantarum and stuff like that, they tend to basically create a gut microbiome that makes you less hungry, satisfies you, you achieve greater satiety, and also you produce, you'll produce isobutyrate from, which is again can feed the colonocytes. So you don't need to basically all this other garbage where you, you listen to basically some of the proponents of 10 cups of fiber and all that every day and stuff like that, or the sort of things that Eric Burgess and many others promote in that regard. Well, you're feeding these things, and then people wonder why they get a plateau, while they're having certain issues in basically losing weight on a ketogenic diet. Well, if you're feeding them this sort of stuff, that's why. And that's why you basically always fall off the wagon. That's why you're always basically cheating, because you're actually breeding the wrong sort of stuff, which is there, down there in the gut going, I want more, basically just, you go past the fridge and you see and you go, oh shit, I love, that ice cream looks good. That's me, We've all got our addictions, let's be honest. Now that I'm actually realizing how I can fight some of these addictions, I may be able to lose the remaining 6 or 7 kilos that I need to lose to get back to my...
Is that ice cream weight?
Yeah, probably is. That's what my mate says. I have stopped through the week. I've given up ice cream through the week. Yeah, I'm suffering. Anyway, we've all got our little indiscretions. I'm always honest with people about mine. I'm not a Puritan in any way. I'm just sort of now trying to biohack to sort of improve my gut microbiome, because I used to, I did have a lot of like bronchitis, asthma as a youngster, and a lot of issues. And even though I had a natural birth, I was underweight, severely underweight, which sort of promotes sort of obesogenic type, when you're premature, they've actually found, also because that actually has a disturbance on the gut microbiome. I wasn't breastfed enough as well. No wonder I love milk. That's the reason. I give that reason.
Childhood trauma.
Childhood trauma. I blame my mum.
Bullshit.
It is. But the interesting thing is that food and the way food is produced has a big effect on the way our mood, our satiety, our appetite, some of the elements of leptin resistance, how the signaling pathways, a lot of these are affected. We know there's a small mini brain in the gut, and it communicates, and there's a signaling there that happens between the two, and bacteria are involved. The thing that we don't have, even in the last 10 years, is we don't have like a silver bullet. We know that when certain types are more prominent, that certain things happen in terms of, just general observation. A lot of this stuff is general observation. So when these type of bacteria are more dominant, we see these things are more in leaner people or normal weight people or stuff like that, or the other ones and all that. But we don't still understand the mechanism. This is where we've made a bit of progress in terms of some of the actual like signaling compounds from these bacteria in the last 5 years, because it's sort of a 10-year thing really when it took off about a decade ago. But even now we have this really rudimentary understanding in that regard. I'm not waiting for the final randomized control studies and, all these sort of stuff that prove definitively like a rubber stamp things, in that way. And some of these bacteria you can't even get in Australia. They really are problematic because the Food Australia or Food Safety Australia, whatever, they basically say, well, you need to provide us with the studies. They know that these are beneficial. There's international studies, but they're just being really arseholes. I actually recently, my friend was trying to get the strain that actually helps oral health, which is a Japanese sort of strain and stuff like that. Got caught up in customs and got basically, it's a probiotic. It's been in humans. Why are you preventing it from coming in? No, it hasn't gone through this process. Basically, it's a protection racket for the food industry and the medical system. That's what it is. Crazy. But we can't get this specific strain that actually isn't like on steroids. This woman was in a centenarian and had perfect teeth. So it's really good for the teeth,
So what's the strain called?
It's a reuteri strain, but I can't remember the actual number.
Okay.
I will be doing something about discussing about it. The problem is we can't get it in Australia, and the problem is these same regulations, because the food standards are basically for Australasia, so they affect New Zealand as well. You guys follow the same standards. Yep. So you guys can't even get it. So if it's intercepted in the mail, if it gets through, you're lucky. If it gets intercepted, you basically get a nasty letter, which is what I got, telling me that they confiscated. Now I realise that what happens in the gut is also an important element. So you've got basically, it's not only the nexus there. Obviously, if you've got, like sludge, you could actually affect the sort of pancreatic or you can have a low-grade pancreatitis type thing, which can cause issues with digestion and stuff like that. So there could be that. It's very hard to diagnose from a distance. As I say to people, I say, you've got to go and do these tests to work out what it is. I can't diagnose you from a distance. Once I know, then I can give you a protocol or a strategy how to sort of resolve these. And some of them can take a bit longer than others. But there is another dimension, which is in the gut end. And the health of the gut is really important as well. It basically keeps candida under control. So these strains are able to keep candida under control. So a lot of the people that have got candida and can't resolve candida even on a carnivore diet, they go elimination to basically have less feeding of candida. That doesn't resolve anything until you basically get the other bacterial strains in there. They may be eating foods like meats that are basically have got more antibiotics in them or glyphosate and stuff like that. So they're basically never really resolving that issue to basically be able to keep candida under control. So it's not that the diet is not right. The diet is right if you've got the strains that can actually be supported by the diet. Yeah. But the issue is that you're adding things in that you don't realize are causing these microbiome issues that just eating, a sort of animal products will resolve. No, they won't. A lot of things that actually also help is a lot of the cured meats. Things, people have avoided cured meats, have avoided things like, high meats or whatever. And the reason for them, why they avoid these things, is because traditional populations understood the value of them, to basically put back those, increase the concentration of these beneficial bacterial strains you find, like the reuteri ones, the Rhamnosus ones, the Plantarum ones, Plantarum ones.
Would those be present like naturally if you are fermenting your own meat, or would you have to add them just to make sure?
These animals would have had these in the wild because they weren't on any antibiotics or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So when you killed the animal, you didn't eat it immediately. You dragged it back to your, and you ate it over. And we had a very low pH. So it would ferment and these would increase in the meat. So you would get a very good amount of these things in your body, give you satiety, allow you to go from feast to famine much more comfortably. You don't see basically tribal people in a panic state or, very hyped up or whatever. They're very relaxed, very easy. Yeah, we didn't get a kill next, they can go on for longer because they have a satiety level because of the bacteria that they have. So they are more happy people. They tend to smile more. This is what also Price had noticed. Dr. Price, he noticed when he went around the world, he noticed these sort of things in people, that they were more happy people when they ate an ancestral diet. They ate these sort of before the foods of civilization came in that changed the balance of the microbiome as well, plus damage their oral health and a whole lot of other things, because health starts from the oral right through.
Yep.
And that's what I've actually noticed, and I've realized that was part of the element that I was missing. And now that I've gone down this rabbit hole, I've realized the importance of, everybody talks about the gut microbiome, but they don't understand it. And they view it in this sort of reductionist way, a very, narrow reductionist way. Oh, if you take fiber, it'll increase this, you'll get more short-chain fatty acid. No, you'll also drive up, other things. It's an unbalance. You'll also, increase appetite and a whole lot of other things. So that's not a good thing. The thing is, you need to view the gut microbiome from a more holistic approach, understanding that there are a lot of immunomodulation, not the appetite only, not the production of short-chain fatty acid only, because you can get from meat, you can get isobutyrate, you can get short-chain fatty acids as well. That's not the issue. You can get it from meat or fiber. The issue is the types of gut microbiome that you have that has an effect on a lot of things in your body. And that's where the species appropriate foods, and also foods that may be species appropriate but may be tainted, glyphosate, antibiotics, with things that can basically reduce their effectiveness. So when people say, I've got still gut issues, I'm on basically a carnivore diet and I can't resolve them, I usually say, well, have you gone to pastured meats and organic pastured stuff and stuff like that to eliminate those? Have you looked at, resolving that with cleaner foods and stuff like that? Now I understand that even if you do that to a extent, you will help those bacteria if they are still there present. If you've got some of them, you will help them, but it will take a very long time to populate because you've got the other pathogenics which are in dominance and they can fight back. So, it's like a gang, if there's a couple of good players and quite a few nasties, well, they're going to win most of the time. You'll be struggling to try and get a foothold into your system. So you need to help to overwhelm, to put more good guys in there to basically deal with the bad guys. So that's the sort of side now that I understand. These things would have naturally come from an ancestral diet because they would have been in the foods that we ate, the wild foods, the wild animals that we consumed, the foods.
Yeah.
And so we wouldn't have had this need to go to a supplement because we would have got it from the wild animals. They do exist. A lot of these strains do exist in wild animals. So we know that they exist, and we would have got them like that when we hunted wild animals. So that's another option. Maybe people go, rather than go to, wild type foods, hunted meats and stuff like that as an option to basically help repopulate those strains and stuff like that for a period of time, so they can get that benefit in that way. And then they can go to pastured meats and stuff like that, which are probably less expensive. So there's a lot of ways to health or to improve your gut microbiome. There's not only going and buying these strains or trying to get them past the authorities, the ones that are not allowed in. But so there are other options, what I'm trying to say to people, because not everybody's going to basically have the skillful way of getting around certain things, let's say, without saying too much. But the thing that people need to understand is that there are other options out there for them. Any other questions you'd like to ask me?
Yes. So the question was like, if I'm taking a liver from the supermarket and I ferment that, how do I know that I get the right beneficial type of bacteria, or do I?
You don't, unless you know that it's pastured. You know it's sourcing. So if you know it's organically pastured, you will get benefits. That's true. But if you don't know it's sourcing, maybe that you should consider sort of accessing a farmer that basically produces organically produced meats and be able to access the organ meat. So when they actually slaughter them, you say, can I buy them off you? And I'll come around, give me a phone call. I'll drop in, pick them up, and take them home, and then you can ferment them. So you can increase the bacterial, those beneficial good bacteria in that, and then consume that, which will improve your gut microbiome, will improve your satiety, will also improve your capacity to also lose weight. Because we see that when you've got these bacterial strains in your gut, they are found predominantly in lean and people of normal weight. So that should be telling us something, that automatically that, if we're eating the right sort of sourced foods, we should see improvements there in that regard. Does that sort of?
Yeah, I think so. So literally, so I'm just playing around with my camera because I'm getting all fussy all of a sudden. So people who are eating fermented liver, even like kimchi or sauerkraut, whatever,
exactly.
they may or may not eat something that is good. So if we don't know,
it depends. It depends the sourcing.
Yeah.
Is it organic? Is it GMO free? Organic. No glyphosate, none of that. So it's the type. And a lot of people will sort of say, they've put some stuff in there, but what have they put in there?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So it's really important to know your source. That's one thing. The other thing is that you could focus on also raw cheeses from places like Italy and France, which tend to be, come from pastured sort of animals that are organic, pastured. Some of the Greek feta cheeses are also coming from pasture. The problem is that most of them, they don't sell any raw unless you're in the country, or somebody in the country that can send you something that is raw, done in the traditional way.
Yeah.
That's the, I think there are some, there's some places in Melbourne. I don't know about Sydney, but I do know in Melbourne that some Greek shops that bring over, raw type feta cheeses.
Okay.
But they're very rare. You can't find them in Hobart, unfortunately, which really annoys me. But anyway, it's just what it is. I can't do much about it.
Yeah.
So those ones would have those type of strains that would be beneficial. And it's really when you take a look at populations, because I go back and I look at and I go, well, these people were, even though they were eating certain carbohydrates or stuff like that, they tend to be more leaner and stuff like that. There's always been a bit, the confusion part, why certain things and all that. And when you realize that they didn't consume massive amounts, it was always, it was basically 30% or less. But, we would still consider that not low carb.
Yeah.
Sure. It's better than the 60%, which is nowadays, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But at least, it didn't seem to be affecting a lot of people very lean in the 50s and 60s and all that, even though they were eating some processed foods and stuff like that. And you go, well, what has changed since then? Well, we've seen an explosion of glyphosate in the food supply.
Yep.
And we've also seen, because it's not like people are dousing down antibiotics every day.
No.
And to some extent, antibiotics, even in animals, some of it, by the time the animal gets slaughtered, a lot of it, may not be in the system. It'll be very mild, very little, stuff like that. So some of the bacteria in there can actually reduce the actual, so you don't get as much. Where the problem lies is not so much, even though antibiotics are a problem, but they're very low. And usually, let's say they would kill a certain percentage, it would still allow for those to grow back again. I think the big thing, the big monster, or you could say the elephant in the room, is glyphosate. And it's not that a lot of people are focused on glyphosate in other terms, but I usually say, well, if you take a look at plants, there are many plant compounds that are very toxic to the body in large amounts. So, that's just another toxin, a plant toxin, but it's the antibiotic nature of glyphosate. It's basically giving yourself high doses of antibiotics every single day in large amounts in the processed food. And that's the problem. That's where you
I think they use it everywhere.
What was that?
I think they use it everywhere.
They do. They do. They
remember
spray
when
everywhere. The councils do.
Yeah,
all
when
over
we
the
lived
place.
down on the west coast where we used to walk, one day I see them spraying everything.
Yep.
Glyphosate.
Yep. You think you're not ingesting that in
Roundup.
the air? Roundup, exactly. That's what it's called in Australia, in Australasia. It's called Roundup. You think you're not ingesting that? When I see them, I cross the street and go the other way.
Yeah.
That's how much I try and avoid it. And even then, I try to go to I walk back and I'll take a parallel street to avoid, because that stays in the air for some time.
Yep.
It is annoying when you see that, and it's understandable why a lot of these people that actually use extensively get a lot of health issues. There is a dimension of that when you don't get beneficial bacteria, and I've actually shown that some of the beneficial bacteria can also deal with cancer cells and other and other pathogens. So if you're basically getting rid of these that help the bodies because they work with the immune modulation with the immune system, well, then you're not really supporting that part of trying to defend the body. So you're making it more vulnerable. So it's an indirect way to cancer, plus all the other inappropriate things that they do, because people that eat that sort of food that has got the glyphosate also are actually causing a lot of other damage to a lot of other pathways in their system. So which they're making it more, they're pushing the growth pathways that are basically making it more likely to move towards senescence and then cancer. But at the same time, by taking out the good bacteria, the good guys, you're actually reducing the ability of the body to fight back effectively. Yep. So it's a sort of a two-pronged attack against the body from the food supply in both different ways. And that's why we find all these associations all over the place, and we can't make sense of the thing. Yep. It's because people are not looking at the elephants in the room, or when you do say glyphosate, immediately what people say is you're a crackpot.
Yeah,
that's what they say. You talk about Roundup or you say they're a crackpot. That's why I don't focus on the chemical stuff and all that. That may have an effect and all that. I can't prove it because there's not good enough studies. So I don't argue from that point. I argue from the point of the antibacterial, the continuous assault, antibacterial assault that is causing damage to the gut microbiome, and the issues there that we've got good research to show that you can fatten up, you can do this, when you have certain strains that are dominating and that are in the food supply, or basically dominate because you've taken out the good guys. Yeah. So we can actually show that because we've got evidence-based research to show that. But we can't argue the other points, even though they may be or may not be,
sure,
are associated only, but we can show some causal relationships in this regard to that. So that's how I argue the antibiotic pathway, and less of the other stuff, because immediately you'll be called a crackpot.
Yeah, it's equal to 5G.
Exactly. Well, look, 5G is, as I've shown, there's not a problem. Actually penetrates less the body. It's not a problem.
I just meant that when you bring glyphosate up, it's the same thing as bringing 5G up.
But there is an issue at one point, which is all electromagnetic fields, whether 5G, whether they're your electrical wiring in the home or whatever, or all these things do have a blue spectrum of light, of photons. And that is where the problem lies, the blue spectrum. So we're getting too much blue light, especially in the evening when you're at home and your wiring, everything else is just assaulting your body. Some people go as far as turning off the electricity completely, or turning off. They've got like isolations to specific rooms so they can have the kitchen running because they've got a fridge in there, and they've got isolation in all the other ones to reduce the amount of EMF and that part of the spectrum of the EMF, because there is a whole. So, but that's valid, that part. But the other stuff isn't. But the problem is when you try to argue, immediately people have tried to lump you in with the other crowd. So it's like, oh God, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other things you'd like to ask, as a final sort of?
If you are in New Zealand or Australia and you want to increase the good bacteria for you, what would you do? Would you just try and eat fermented foods, like even salami, as long as it's good salami, as it's traditionally made? Maybe.
Yeah, I would look at the sourcing. So if you can get pastured, like the salami and the cured meats coming from from pastured animals.
Mm-hmm.
Those ones that are traditionally cured. So the free range animals, like
Yep.
I get my bacon, for instance, which is free range bacon, and it's basically cured, smoked, cured. So salt and smoked. And it's really nice. You can have it raw or cooked any way you like because it's smoked. So that's one option. There are other options like certain of the European cheeses, the raw cheeses, which
Yep.
we can get in certain types of delis. But even the Comté, which is a French one, which is raw, unpasteurized, which is sold at, at basically Woolworths in Australia, and also in Countdown in New Zealand. So there's another sort of cheese where you can get the access to these strains, which are beneficial. So that's one option. The other option is finding those sort of meats and then creating high meat out of them. It's another way of actually getting those beneficial type of bacteria. So that's the things you can do.
Yeah. Well, Harry, thank you so much for coming on my channel again and talking about what you are researching. Interesting as usual, and hopefully it's a bit helpful to some people. And if you want to know more about specific strains, you will have to head over to Harry's channel in December and have a look at what's coming up there, basically.
There's a few things at the moment there that they can find
Yep.
for some strains, but yeah, eventually there'll be more.
Cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's great. Enjoyed it.